Welcome back to In Talks With, the podcast where we explore the stories, practices and inspirations of some of the most exciting voices in contemporary art and culture. I'm Danielle Rudoichin, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to this episode, which features guest host Simon Chilvers. Simon travelled to the seaside town of Margate in the UK, where he visited the remarkable Tracey Emin residency to speak with Dutch artist Joline Kwakkenbos. Known for her evocative self-portraits, Joline's work delves into themes of identity, memory, queerness, and the fluidity of the self. Her current exhibition, Shapeshifters, curated by Dame Tracey Emin, offers a deeply personal yet universally resonant exploration of self-representation. Born in 1997 in Hilversum in the Netherlands, Joline grew up in a small Dutch village where her creativity was nurtured from an early age. Her parents' hands-on creative approach to life sparked her fascination with making and inspired her journey into the arts. Initially trained in fashion design, she graduated in 2019 and discovered a love for painting as a medium for expressing her unique visual language. Over the years, her work has evolved to include a collection of garments that reflect the diverse personas and narratives within her self-portraits. In this episode, Simon and Joline discuss her path from fashion to fine art, the transformative power of self-portraiture, and how her work challenges traditional notions of identity, representation, and history.
So, I am in Margate at the Tracey Emin residency with Joline Kwakkenbos. Why don't you introduce yourself, Joline, and tell us a little bit about your life as an artist in this amazing residency in Margate.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Joline Kwakkenbos. Well, it's actually in Holland, it's Joline Kwakkenbos, okay. But I changed it in England to Joline, which is way easier. And I like that it's a bit shorter. But yeah, we're actually here in the studio, and you called it already an amazing place, the residency in Margate. I have been working here since March and have been settling into my first studio alongside so many great artists. This is a building created, like a place created by Dame Tracey Emin, who also works and lives here in Margate, and she turned this beautiful old bathhouse into a community full of artists, and it provides private professional studios and also a residency program which is fully free for 18 months. And yeah, it's amazing to be here and to be surrounded by so many exciting things. And yeah, happy to talk with you today.
Well, it's amazing to be sitting in your studio, which is intimate, beautiful, surrounded by new paintings, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And obviously there's a big show of your work currently in the gallery just around the corner called Shapeshifters, which we'll dive into talking about also. But I think it's always nice to start off with giving the listener a little bit of context. So you grew up in a small village in the Netherlands. What's your kind of first kind of creative memory, and how do you think that sort of informed and drove the way that your work has evolved to where we are today? Oh, there's a seagull. I don't know if anyone can hear that, but we are definitely by the seaside.
Yeah, it's a good sign. Well, actually, yeah, I grew up in a small village in Holland, and it's funny because if you know Holland, like those villages where I grew up, it's very typical. It's like a farmer's village with lots of meadows around it, and it's kind of like secluded. And I think as a child I was kind of like forced almost to like get in touch with my creative and fantasy, of like fantasize about stuff, because there wasn't a lot around. There was a lot of nature that I felt connected with, and I think nature was one of my biggest like exciting friends throughout that time, because I felt like I could just make up stories and The house where I grew up, my parents are both really creative. They had this urge to always make something. My mom teaches quilt making and makes amazing textiles, and my dad builds like little houses in the garden, and they were always doing something with their hands. And I learned that you could make anything. Anything is possible if you put your mind to it. And I think I just grew up in an environment where I just felt the urge to draw, to create things, because that felt right. And I've always kept that with me, that feeling of like that possibility that you can create things. In general, like the village, it was a bit conservative. I wasn't connected with art. We didn't visit museums, or my parents weren't into like, I didn't learn anything about art, but I learned about making. And
yeah, it's interesting. I think quite a lot of fashion people and art people find their way to creativity through just the physicality of making stuff, and that kind of like encouragement from their families to like use your hands. Whether it's drawing or building something physical. Yeah,
it's exciting because it just you connect in a personal way with yourself from a young age. You're just curious and you play, and drawing was always a way to be free, to have fun. And I had a little easel with a little table in the garden. I just always was making stuff. So I think I really appreciate that time. But yeah, I because my mom was working a lot with textiles, we sewed together. She learned me to knit and embroider, and I made my first quilt when I was around like 6. It was like it was fun to work with that, and I think that's why I also got interested in making garments. And I went to fashion school after fashion design, studied that.
And do you think that's kind of how you found fashion, through your mum and through the quilt making?
I thought it was a very I think fashion design got my interest because of working with textiles and growing up
around that.
And it's funny because when I went to that university, it's like I didn't know anything about art. So of course we had classes during that course. In the first year we had a painting class by an animation teacher, and we had art history, and then I found out that there's a world of art as well. So it was a funny experience to study something that I love to do. I loved making garments, but at the same time I realized there is a lot more.
Where was the fashion course?
So it's called Artes, and it's based in Arnhem.
Yeah.
And it's a very traditional school where you graduate with a final collection. You make all your garments. It's very technical as well. You learn the whole technical part of pattern making, and at the same time it's very experimental. So it's not based on any commercial world or branding. It's about connecting with your own inspiration. It's
and being free.
Yeah. So I think during one of our assignments, I had to create my own inspiration instead of using things from art history or read like literature. So I painted like a few canvases, and I used that as inspiration for a collection. And then I realized, like, oh my god, I can express myself in painting, and that is a total different way than designing, because that has a lot of technical aspects to it, and painting felt so free. But I wanted to finish the course, and I after graduated, I remember saying to myself, like, now it's time to go paint.
Okay, that's so interesting that you kind of found art through fashion. And when you were growing up, were you interested in clothes then? Did you dress up as a child, or was it just, how did that kind of...
Well, yeah, it was, I felt there was as a child, you feel that fun part of getting into characters, dressing up. And I had a friend in the village. He's still a very good friend to me. He actually went to the same fashion school, and he created these dresses. I dressed up in them. We used to play like different kind of like plays, and we did photographs. And I think I had this idea about fashion when I went to school, but I started feeling a bit uncomfortable within the contemporary fashion world. I just felt I was more like my interest shifted into fine arts. That wasn't a part of the course, and I wanted to explore that. So after graduating, I really focused on that specifically.
And tell us a little bit about your practice, because it's very based around the idea of self-portrait, and obviously those things around garments and fashion has become a big part of your work. And I want you to explain a little bit about how you think about the clothes. But first of all, like when we were in the gallery together just before, you were talking about the way in which you think about the self-portrait and how you use that as a kind of way to talk about feelings and memories. Do you want to talk a little bit about your practice in that sense?
Self-portraiture over the last years, it became something really important to me. In the beginning, I learned painting through observing, through visiting museums, because I didn't study any art. I had this urge to know more, and I decided on drawing for a year in like Copenhagen in a museum at Torvalds, and they had these amazing sculptures, and I learned about the body, the whole technical part of it's like, and also like with sculptures you have garments around it, and I went to visit the National Portrait Gallery loads to like observe like Renaissance painting, and I learned a lot by looking, and I made a lot of work that wasn't very much my work now, but over the years it developed, and I felt this sense of making self-portraits at one point, because I felt this urge to get to know myself through painting. I had this longing at one point to become a painter, as like I saw so many painters being a painter, and I wanted to understand how that worked, and I was also confronted by the fact that I couldn't portrait any of my friends or people around me, because I felt that I really needed to connect with an internal side into the work. So like just looking at something would be just a side of something, and I wanted to understand it from the inside, and that felt really right with portraying myself, and I could connect with emotions and thoughts. And as a human being, you have like these naughty thoughts, and you have these ideas, and you have shame, or you think back on a time, or you have so many great things you can do with your mind, and you can fantasize about something, and you can put it into a reality or something that you recognize as like, I use, for instance, like recognizable symbols like candle or a book, and it could have so much weight in it. But it's like that self-portraiture was so important, because I felt like I don't want to paint myself, but I want to make a portrait of the self that I follow, and it's changing every day. Like humans are so like they change constantly, what they experience, what they see, what they think, and what influences that. And it's not about that I'm like, I have an obsession with my own being. It's just a way of understanding oneself.
And exploring like multiple versions of who you are.
Yeah, and when I started reading, because I was getting more interested in art, and I started reading a lot, and I think Jennifer Higgy, for instance, wrote a really interesting book about self-portraiture made by female artists, and I felt like I found my people, like, and not only like understanding oneself through self-portraiture, but having feeling empowered to represent yourself in the way that you want to, feel completely free and play with it. There's just so much in this world that puts us down, like opinions, laws, rules, and I felt bothered by it, and paintings could set me free. That's very special.
And there's a balance between the work between sort of autobiography and fictional narrative. How do you see that kind of, how do you decide? I mean, do the paintings tell you, like, how do those things marry? How do you push and pull?
Well, it's interesting, because I think work is easily autobiographical, because whatever you do or whatever is made through your hands, it's connected with time and a life that you live. So self-portraiture is a very autobiographical thing. It just exposes that you use yourself as a subject, but by playing with it, it can become something outside of reality, which really interests me, because I don't want people to see likeliness, or like, oh, you capture yourself very well. Like, most people don't really know what's going on within someone, or whatever they experience, and I can look at myself from the inside. So that's a very autobiographical thing to do, because you follow your own experiences and what feelings comes out of that. And then at the same time, I can just have like a fantasy about it. I can just like picture myself as a specific character. I can dress up like something that is different from what you see on the streets nowadays, and I just can create stories through, like, that are actually happening next, like, besides the life you're living, and that feels like expanding, like a freedom that actually we are all capable of. We can all fantasize about stuff, and that's really referring to childhood. When I started making drawings, it just felt like you can just wander around in your own fictional world.
You talked a little bit there about the garments, and I know that you collect garments, and that you inhabit them in certain ways in which you then create the paintings from. And I think for people that come to see the show, and they must come to see the show, it's amazing. How does that work? Like, how do you, first of all, like, what draws you to garments, and then how do they kind of, wearing them, become part of the paintings?
Well, I think I was for a while I was a bit confused about having to study fashion, for instance, because I didn't feel like a fashion designer. I felt a big appreciation for clothing, for the make, how they were made, how they would choose their fabrics, what the fabrics were made of, what kind of characters they can capture, all the details, and that's really, I felt a really big interest to that, more than the fact that I wanted to express myself within designing. So I felt the garments would give me something instead of I would give something to the garments. And I think at one point I said to myself, I need to let go fully of fashion and to become a painter and to be in the arts world. But at one point I started feeling like my appreciation for garments and garment making and the expression with clothing came back, and started to become a part of my work. And I felt that it's a personal interest to, whenever I always source like these amazing pieces from history. And I think it's also just like a very personal interest that I'm drawn to historical garments, but it just brings me back to a specific time where clothing was so extremely interesting and there was so much effort put into the making process and the quality of it. And at the same time, it was like divided into two sexes, and it just put a lot of rules on how you had to represent yourself. And I think a lot of people didn't feel comfortable in that. And I get extremely interested by reading about, like, for instance, Romain Brooks or Radcliffe Hall, and like all the figures that I feel connected with because they did cross-dressing through history, and they kind of like shaped it up, like the whole society that really puts rules on you. And I think by dressing up, I can step into different versions of myself, and it's like it's a very exciting thing to do. I actually wish that when I'm 60 or something, I could open up a place where the whole collection will be shown
of all the clothes that you've worn through the years. Yeah,
I sometimes buy stuff that I can't even wear. You have these Victorian shoes, and they're very small, and I mean they come from like the end of 1800, and sometimes I fix them and I recreate clothes based on them, but they're just amazing. It's such a shame that we lost so many of those beautiful ways of making.
But we were talking in the gallery before about this idea that sometimes you feel more exposed when you're dressed than when you're undressed, because some of the work in some of the paintings you are naked or semi-naked. Talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was really interesting, the way that you were talking about what clothes versus the body means sometimes in the work.
Yeah, it's. I thought it was so interesting when I started painting self-portraits. I got a lot of response like, "Oh, you paint yourself naked," or "It's very exposing," or "Do you eroticize yourself?" Like, there's like a lot of people feel uncomfortable seeing someone they know naked.
Yeah.
But we see throughout art history that the female nude was a subject for, unfortunately, only men, like mostly men, painters. And I felt like I within painting, I would be purely myself, just like a naked human body. And while dressing up, I felt I show a personal side of myself. Just you have that base, you have that body that we recognize as a naked body, and we share that. We have different versions of them, but we all share a naked body. But how you dress up is adding a layer of personal intimacy. It's like when I wear a suit, people might question elements of history or how we view on how we should look, or it's a very interesting part. And sometimes when I dress in like a very old Napoleon suit, it's like people question, why do you do that, or what is happening here? It's a woman and it's a man's suit, and it's very, you can touch on a lot of topics that are strangely still very awkward for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of subverting sort of gender codes through fashion is like one of those topics that never seems to stop being interesting to people. I mean, we've had endless fashion collections about genderless fashion and all of this kind of stuff, and I guess you're all very much playing with that in the work. I think the word queer gets bandied around a lot at the moment, but like for you, what does the idea of queerness actually mean? Like, and how does that sort of, again, talk to the work?
Well, throughout the self-portraits that I've made over the years, I also started realizing I was queer, and I was exploring that a lot, and queerness is very important to me, and I'm really proud of it, because for me it's a form of like it's a form of art almost. It's like art can be a way of expressing, can be a way of taking your own freedom and using it, showing it, and it can overcome time or politics or people, like opinions, but it takes their place, and that's what I feel really proud of the queer community. They express themselves in their own way instead of all the rules and the like oppressions, and it's beautiful to see that people allow themselves to be free, even though it's been taken away from them most of the time. And I feel like my life is enriched by being queer, like having the community around, and
I can see it even just in the way in which you're smiling when you're talking about it, how important it is to your soul.
It's always interesting, because things that are hard always often turn out to be very important, because I think like the whole coming out and the whole being exposed to the world in a different way, it's very hard for most people to get yourself out there, and then having to say sometimes to myself, I'm so happy that I'm a lesbian. It's like it's like a journey that it's special to experience that, even though it's hard, and even though people have opinions about it. It's and I see that through art history. There were some very brave queer people who really followed their belief and their own heart, and it will always it will always touch someone throughout time, and connect, and I feel connected with that. I feel like when I read about all those women writers, artists, all also queer and non-binary, and I feel like I found a family throughout history, and when you're like a bit lost, or you don't know where to go, or you don't think that someone understands you, you can connect with that.
It's really powerful, I think. Let's talk a little bit specifically about Shapeshifters, which is the show that is on until January the 26th, and it's curated by Dame Tracey Emin, whose residency here is incredible, and you've obviously been a resident since the beginning of the year. It's interesting for us, like when I first arrived and we went to see the gallery together, and then we came to the studio, and like I was saying to you that the idea for a lot of artists to be confronted on a daily basis when they come into the studio with a show they've just hung must be quite a strange feeling. But tell me a little bit about how the curation happened, what it was like working with Tracey, and the whole process of hanging this beautiful room of your self-portraits.
It's amazing. It's such a life-changing experience. It's absolutely wonderful to see what's happening here in Margate, and I wasn't very aware of it, but when there was this open call for a free studio here in Margate, and I've never been to Margate, so somewhere around Christmas I was like, okay, I'm gonna just check it out, and I've met Tracey and Elissa, who's the director here, and it was just so exciting. It's like coming to a place where it's like a funny seaside town, and you don't really know what's going on there. It feels like a little village, and then there's this group of artists working, and you have this amazing building. Tracey could have done so many things, but she chose to invest her time and her knowledge and her energy into Margate, and she created this place where people can come together and get better in what they do, learn more. And when I started working here, I felt it was a really, really inspiring place. I was always longing for this community. And I didn't know where to find it. And schools, like I was applying for art schools, but it was so expensive. And here it feels like you can dedicate your life to it, and at the same time you share it in such a special way.
What was it like though, having someone of her kind of stature, like looking at your paintings? Like you told me this great story before about how the show is pretty much ready to go, and then she was like, "Oh, we need you to do another piece for this wall," which ended up being the last thing you did, and it's probably the biggest one in the space. What's it like when because it must be quite intimidating.
Yeah, I think also for the show it was really interesting because I was already there for a few months and I was creating in the studio, and I have one of the professional studios where you don't follow any program, you're independent, but if you need feedback there's always a chance. Tracey comes by regularly, and when we were putting up the show, she just took out the paintings and we created something with what was there. And it's just like that's really special. I think in the beginning when I started working here, I felt a bit insecure still about what I was doing, and because I wasn't a lot out there yet. And she came around and had a look, and it's like I felt really nervous. I felt
I'm sure. I mean, it's like a big deal. Like
yeah.
You know.
And at the same time, I felt like there's a chance to learn something from someone very special, and she shares her thoughts, and she will always be honest. You can count on her honest opinion, and that is very special. You really have to not take that for granted. And I felt that right away, like I have an opportunity to learn. And
is there anything she said to you when you were doing the show that stuck with you in terms of
I think when I got to know her a bit better, I was a bit insecure still about things maybe being exposed within my work, because it's like so personal, and people will ask questions, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to like talk about anything in my life, like private life. And but she really inspired me to be strong and to know what you talk about, know where you stand. And she was like, did you do anything wrong? Do you have something to hide? If no, then you don't have a problem. Then you can just get yourself out there, and no one can touch that if you protect it yourself, if you know what you're doing and don't. It's wonderful to learn from her. And also I've seen her speak in like public interviews and audiences, and it's so inspiring. She's a force.
One of the other things that I'm particularly drawn to in your paintings, which we haven't talked about, is the colour palette and the way in which you use colour in the pictures. And we talked a little bit before we started recording that there's something about the work that even when you're wearing quite historical clothing, it feels very contemporary and very modern. And I guess that's because you're a person of the modern world. But how do you think about the things that are in the works? Because the last work that you created, you said, had much more of a set in a way, like there's a sofa, and in the other works it's more just like objects, like you said, the candle or like a book. How do you think about the world in which is in those canvases, the colours and the textures? And
Well, before going to Margate, I was painting myself a lot in interior scenes because I was very concentrated in my own space and painting at home. And I think coming to Margate really opened it up. For the first time, I was walking back from my studio to my house, and I'd never had that experience. And I was like, taking my paintings in my hand with me back home during the walk. And I think I use that a lot to create an open space within these portraits. It's like sometimes it feels like you're in like a landscape of color, and it doesn't necessarily refer to any parts of our reality. And I think I've found it very important to focus on the internal part. And when you think or when you feel what you're thinking, or you connect with yourself, it's a very intimate happening. So it doesn't really matter where you are. It's a very close connection with yourself. And a lot of paintings expose that. I always try to paint in dark colors. I always was longing for it. That Van Gogh has this amazing pieces, made of peasants and in this twilight, and I was so mesmerized by it. But I never could make it work because I felt like my images are sometimes full of weight, full of emotion, full of it's like a spiritual thing. Using very bright colors is making it, for me it makes it light, and it makes it joyous, and there's so much colors always around us, and I felt like I was just dipping myself into the bright colors of paint, and almost kind of like wanting to transform myself into the substance of paint.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Van Gogh there. Are there other painters that are kind of always on your mind, or people that you think about when you're working?
Yeah, I think it changes a lot. I'm so excited to get to know so much artists still. Over the last year, I've learned a lot. I think back in fashion, fashion design, when we had art history, I couldn't really place it, all the artists that we learned about. But coming from my own personal interest now, it just becomes like these friends around me. And I got to know over the last year like Paula Madison Becker and Gwen John, and I'm reading now about Tove Jansson, and it's like all these amazing women creating such an amazing amount of work, and very connected with themselves as well. That is really
Tea spillage.
Tea spillage. Yeah, that's amazing, and I take them with me. And Van Gogh is I feel strangely very connected, because of course he's also from Holland, and I wasn't very connected with Holland within the art scene yet, because I didn't really understand what was going on, and
I think there's something incredibly queer about Van Gogh. I mean, I don't know. It's always there's something about it.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's always felt like that a bit to me.
Yeah.
We're in your studio now, and we're looking at, a massive painting on the wall of you in an incredible waistcoat and trousers, and I assume you're reading a book and reclining on a chair. What's coming next? What are you working on at the moment? There's like so many delicious things.
Well, yeah, it's exciting. I actually have to be honest that I felt a bit detached after the opening of the show, because of course it's a very well-known thing. When you open a show, you have to like set your mind to something new. But I think this whole show, Shapeshifters, was kind of like a closure of something. I was longing to connect with a spiritual sense of a painter. I was accepting my body and using it as a canvas to expose things. And now I feel like there's an openness to create new pieces in a different way. And I just have to get obsessed again with something. But I will be going. I want to continue with self-portraiture because I feel there's a great importance to it, because we view sometimes self-portraiture as a very like a side thing almost, like artists like capturing themselves as the creator of what they make. But I feel like there's a whole new world that we can use. It's almost like being queer, but it's like I can just do drag or cross-dress within my paintings. And within a time where it's like it's such a digital world, I feel like I can connect with that on a very like almost like it's very close to earth.
Well, there's a physicality about the work as well. Like it feels like there's a real texture and a kind of depth to the surface of them. And you were saying before that because you keep these amazing journals, and there's a couple in the gallery space, but you were talking a little bit about. Tell me a little bit more about the journals and what you're going to be doing a book, and that all sounds super exciting.
Yeah, it's something that is happening next year. I have been following the portraits within my journals, and wherever I am, I'm always writing. I started writing letters to the artists, like a spiritual sense, and I started to like say to her like I will find you. I will keep on going and make sure that we will meet. So over the last few years, I've been writing so much and having that inner conversation. Now I think we have met here in Margate, and I know it's going to change. So I want to put that first edition of writings into something to cherish it and to expose a bit of my internal connection to all the works. It will be accompanied by almost 200 sketches that follow that whole internal connection and story. So it's gonna be something. I'm slightly nervous about it because painting creates the possibility to speak about something without using words. We connect to what we see, what we experience, what we feel. I put in a lot of emotion into the work, and then someone else gets a lot of emotion by seeing it, hopefully. Writing is something, it's something else, but also beautiful. It's interesting to start to share that, and I hope to do it, to make loads of more editions with
Please do. Before we wrap up, and we could have talked for much longer, what do you want people to kind of take away from seeing the show? What was that be like?
Oh, well, what I loved, we opened 2 weeks ago, and it was amazing. I loved that people showed up, and that Margate was a place to experience art. Elissa Cray shows her work next to mine, and it's a beautiful combination. And her photographs will be shown like downstairs in the building. But
it's a beautiful contrast. There are these kinds of incredible black and white photos, which she's also using her body, right, to say something else, and they're like depth forests and quite deep, and they are very different, but there is something quite unifying about them.
Like almost like an animal, like capturing yourself in a different way. And it's a beautiful combination. But the response what I got was that people I got feedback that people started to have conversations with each other while standing in front of the work. They became curious, they shared stories of their own. And I think that would be the biggest something like I find really important, that it creates connection. And I really hope that people, like, it's not about that it's me on the picture, but that people feel connected to it and feel an openness to share their own story, or even get inspired to represent themselves in the way they want. I strongly believe that we all have a power to choose who we are, even though the world says we can't. And that's what I find inspiring. It's interesting that the audience can inspire me again, that through the paintings we can just share so much, even though we can't put it into words, which we can share within feeling.
Yeah.
It's very strong.
Well, it's such a nice way of ending a very lovely conversation. And thank you so much for showing me your beautiful exhibition. And everyone needs to come to Margate by the 26th of January, and we'll put all the information at the end of the episode.
Open every weekend.
Every weekend. Come to Margate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Redoitjen. The sound and theme music is by Woogie Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. Please subscribe and leave a review. To pitch for guest ideas, you can DM me via my socials at Danielle Redoitjen. Thanks for listening.